Hi. This is a Conversations with Creatives podcast for Opus. If you're a regular listener, you might know we're currently discussing the power of art and navigating a George Bernard Shaw quote. He said, "Imagination is the beginning of creation. You imagine what you desire, you will what you imagine, and at last you create what you will." Last month, we kicked things off speaking with 4 artists about that first step by imagining endless possibilities. This time, we're discussing putting our vision into practice. If we will what we imagine and we create what we will, what does it take to develop our vision, especially when contending with a constantly evolving reality? Can daily practice and routine ground us? What other tips can artists provide to help us navigate such rapid change? In this episode, I'm really excited to be speaking with the immensely talented Cori Creed and Ian de Hogue, alongside Frederick's brand ambassador Nikko Saturnus Mercialo. We'll be delving into some of the techniques that can be employed to develop and execute our vision, as well as covering more thoughts and tips on practice. Cori Creed is an established West Coast Canadian painter who captures the drama and emotion of coastal landscapes by immersing herself and viewers in the spontaneity and unpredictability of nature. Born in Vancouver, Cori studied fine art at Simon Fraser University and design at Capilano College. Her work has been placed in various private and corporate collections across Canada. She currently lives and paints out of her home and studio in West Vancouver, and has been represented by the Bogie Gallery since 2011.
My name is Cori Creed, and I am primarily a painter and sculptor, but I also employ any medium in order to communicate. So most of my paintings are landscapes. Because I spend so much time outdoors, it's become the vehicle for expression. I work quite large, so most of my work is done in the studio. I do get to go out every once in a while and do plein air, but generally it's out walking around or climbing and taking photos, occasionally sketching, but generally photos, and then coming back to the studio and starting with some of that material, but then also looking at other things I might have been thinking about that day or other artists' work. I might be drawn to some colors in an abstract, like a completely abstract work. Everything you see really becomes an inspiration. But, my starting point is generally either photos or memories of a place that I was in. Part of the whole idea of the storytelling that I do think about while I'm painting is, nobody really sees things the same way. And it becomes so evident in times of conflict when you just cannot communicate with someone, or you see on the news how people are just not communicating. You realize that they're just, everyone is seeing the world through layers and layers of filters of their experience. And so no one is actually seeing the thing the way that you are presenting it. One show I did with a couple other artists was to look at the way that we consume and use things and create our identity with material things. So for that show, I used photography, and I selected a few victims among my friends, and they let me into their closets, and I just took a picture of every single thing that they used to put on their body. And that was a big, whole bunch of big 2-foot by 20-foot banners that just laid out everything that they used to create their identity. And then they let me do some large 4-foot by 10-foot or 10 by 4-foot paintings of them nude. And so there was that juxtaposition. In those kinds of shows, it's really thinking hard about how can I get this message across to someone. In the painting, I'm more thinking about telling my story and the way that I felt in that place. The one thing that I do try and interact with the viewer more is in creating the difference between the story and the storytelling. So I've always been drawn to the Impressionists, the way that you see a lot of their drafting marks or underpainting or pencil lines in their artwork. It was always something that I loved in galleries when I was as young as I can remember. So I will try in my work to create a bit of a space, a three-dimensional space or stage set, and that's the story and something that people can hopefully find their own interpretation. But I also like to try and use marks that live obviously on the surface. So, drawdowns of ink or paint or marks that disrupt that illusion of the 3D, so that it makes you think back and forth between the physical nature of painting and the mark making and the storytelling, as well as being able to just, ideally find something familiar in a landscape or find something interesting in a landscape. For me, I personally, I feel like change and evolution is integral to art. It may be that being pushed in different directions, it can be a growth thing, but certainly flexibility is key. I know that I've had to switch up mediums that I'm used to as I can't get supplies, and that can be very frustrating because you become fluent in a certain medium, and if it's gone, you have to find something else. I have 3 kids and I have a dog now, so it's just about finding time. But I generally take the puppy out for a hike, which is good. It gets me out, and normally I would just crawl straight into my studio as soon as I got the kids out of the house. I feel like my best work happens quickly, and I almost don't even remember doing it. That's what I chase in my daily practice, is how can I get myself into this flow state where things are just coming, because I have so many interruptions these days. I use audiobooks. That's my one, I would say, like, absolute crucial thing that I have in my workday. And especially when I'm painting, if I'm doing more installation stuff, then I might not want the distraction of an audiobook. But when I'm painting, I do really want to get to that place where things almost are automatic. And the best way for me to do that is to put on an audiobook that just removes the chatter part of my brain and allows me to focus on just it's almost unconscious active of painting. And then also, if I get a call from school and I have to leave everything and run, it's quite disorienting sometimes. But being able to come back and put that book back on helps me to get back to the place that I was before. It takes the part of my brain that's always spinning and distracting and thinking of 10 different things, and it just puts it up on the shelf for a while, so that the part of me that can just focus on creating the image and the painting can do that. As far as advice on putting vision into practice, there's a lot of artists out there that feel that the nature of being an artist is that you get to wait for this lightning bolt to hit you, that of inspiration, and then you can create in this frenzy of creation, and the rest of the time you can wait. I think that the whole notion of practice, which has always felt a little, I don't know why, it makes me think of yoga or something, but it's practice. So even if you're not inspired that day, even if you don't know what you want to do, just start. There's times when you'll end up throwing out half of it, but you're learning and you're growing, and so you can't look at it as a waste. You just have to keep working and keep pushing.
Frederick's brand ambassador, Nikko Saturnus Mercialo, is a visual artist, writer, and designer whose creative production spans traditional and digital techniques of painting and sculpture.
My name is Nico. I am a visual artist, writer, and a designer, creative director and co-founder of an experimental design studio called Hyperform. I've been a practicing artist my whole life, probably since I was old enough to hold a crayon. I've been, I guess you could say, a professional artist, whatever that really means. Somebody who sells art, I guess, for the last 4 years. You've caught me at an interesting time here because 4 years is basically the equivalent of going to art school. So in some ways, as a professional artist, I like to think of it in terms of like I just finished school. So the last 4 years has been very much about experimentation and kind of trying to feel my way through what I'm trying to do as a human being, what I'm trying to contribute as a man, and what I'm trying to do as a creative and artist, and how that's going to be affecting the culture that I'm both creating and being created by. I try to focus on classical themes. I try to focus on the same kinds of subjects that have always moved humanity forward, and the kind of the tidal sweep of human emotion in a world that's really beautiful and brutal. Most of my ideas start from mythological references. I tend to look at themes of contrast within that framework as well. So different emotional states and different cultural contexts all mixed together. So I usually start with that. I start more from the perspective of feeling the emotion of the piece and what I'm trying to say through that. I think mythology points at timeless truth. There's a reason that we never get tired of hearing some version of the hero slaying the dragon. We never get tired of the same monomyths that authors like Joseph Campbell identified, or Carl Jung, archetypal studies that he did into mythology point to timeless truths. We're not talking about the actual narrative or story. We're talking about the timeless truths that underpin all of these stories. And this is cross-cultural. We see this in any culture, be it, Western or elsewhere in the world. I'm not in this to make a fashion statement. I believe in revivifying and strengthening my own culture. So the best way to do that isn't to get on Facebook or Instagram or whatever and rant and rave about politics or silly shit. It's to create art and create the kind of world that you want to see. As far as creative routine, I find most of my inspiration from reading. Music is really important to me as well. Most of my artwork is based on different kinds of music. Before I even sketch anything, before I do any sketching on pen and paper or my iPad or whatever the case may be, I'll sit down and build playlists and just kind of get into the flow and get into the vibe of what does the music feel like. And I find that like separating myself from the need to have an exacting visual outcome is usually the best way to get started. I'm a huge fan of the humility and discipline of the daily practice that the old masters like Michelangelo used to do. I'm huge on discipline. I'm huge on repetition. The creative practice, I don't think there's anything really glamorous about it. A lot of people try to dress it up and make it seem sexy. At the end of the day, it's just hard work. It's just filling sketchbooks. It's trying new techniques. It's having the discipline to be comfortable not being good at something until you are good at it. I don't really enjoy not being good at stuff. So if I'm going to pick something up, I tend to commit to it until I'm good enough to know that it either is or is not for me. So my daily practice just looks like puritanical discipline. That's about it. There's no I don't really have any secret tricks. Everybody looks for a life hack, I think, these days to try and shortcut expertise and find a shortcut up the mountain to mastery, and there is none. It's the journey is what creates it. So daily practice, just be my advice to any younger artists or anybody who's picking up art for the first time, is just do it every day, even the days you don't want to, especially those days. If in doubt, just draw from life. Draw the things around you. I'll tend to focus on things that I find are difficult for me. So I've filled sketchbooks with drawings of hands and face positions, different, the body contorted into different positions. And when you do that enough, eventually you get comfortable being able to express absolutely anything, and then it becomes more intuitive at that point, just whatever comes to mind to draw. These turbulent times, like we're living in a time, we've always lived in times of change. All we had to do is look back in history to see how many times people thought the sky was falling and the world was ending, but it didn't. We're all still here. But the difference now is that we see it all, right? There's media 24/7, so it is changing quickly. We've developed this godlike sense of alienation through technology that yet, ironically, none of us can live without. We're concerned about isolation and these things, but the interesting thing is, being able to face all of those challenges, I think provides, very fertile soil for creative imagination. All greatness has its roots in sorrow, right? There's never been a time of history that there hasn't been grief and misery and human suffering, and we rise to meet it. And that, for me, is why I keep going back to the mythological reference and the mythological ideals, because those are what create the roots of culture. Without that, we have nothing, right? So I think being able to lean into the change and being able to face it with courage and not run away from it and not try to stick our heads in the sand and pretend that it's not going to happen if we just wish it to be so, but instead move towards it, like advance in the face of uncertainty and fear. And if you don't like what you see around you, create something different. If you don't like the art you see, make better art. If you feel that something is missing in the world, that's probably a calling to bring it into existence. So I think we're living in the best possible time for somebody to become an artist or a creative or a designer, musician. I mean, that's what the world needs right now. It doesn't need another politician telling everybody how they should feel about, somebody's race or gender or vaccines or whatever we have, right? It needs people who are actively taking a hand in creation. I think we're in the perfect time of human history to do that.
Last, but definitely not least, Ian de Hogue is a Canadian watercolorist and instructor whose creative career began via photography. However, it was during a brief stint studying architecture that a physical love of painting manifested. Whilst primarily self-taught, Ian's paintings have been exhibited in solo and group exhibitions and are included in a growing number of private collections around the world.
My name is Ian de Hogue. When I was starting with watercolor, I was primarily interested in more of the urban scenes and streetscapes, that sort of stuff. But I also kind of had this little side passion where I've kind of always been interested in birds since I was a little kid. And it was always kind of, I don't know if I'd call it my dirty little secret, but it was kind of things that I would work on my own. And if I was out giving demos or teaching, it wouldn't be the focus of anything that I would put out there. But the secret got out, and I started being asked to teach the birds, and it just started kind of snowballing in effect. And now I would say a bulk of what I've been painting over the last couple years has been bird, and now lately more animal. Most of what I do, if not all of my finished paintings, are based upon some form of a reference. This is where the photography background comes in handy, and I'm no Franz Lanting or any other esteemed National Geographic level wildlife photographer, but when the ends is a painting, I'm really not too concerned with the overall depth of field and all that kind of stuff. I'm really just looking for interesting poses, maybe a little bit of a color reference as a starting point for a painting. So it's kind of a war of attrition with a camera lens to just gather material. I mean, watercolor as a medium, it's for me a little unpredictable at times, and that is one of the things that I really like about it, right? We're dealing with liquid on paper, and additional liquids into liquids. So there are things that I can control, and then there are things that I can't. I know that I can be prone to getting stuck into the details, the tiny little bits and things, and that fights a bit with what I like in a watercolor painting, which generally is something a little bit looser. So I always have this little conflict where my eye goes to all the little things, but my heart just wants to kind of abandon them and just start splashing paint around. And trying to find a balance of those two so that I can, I think, lean more towards something a little bit looser. I've had to kind of come about a process that gives me a concrete way of looking at a subject figuring out what I'm going to do, and then move forward with it while still having some spots along the way that I get to put some input into. I can relax a little bit. I don't have to, worry so much about focusing on the little details, because it's a process that I can repeat, and it's greater than 50% of the time going to be successful, rather than going for the individual hues and things like that. My approach now is I'll sit there and I'll look at a reference and I'll go for what is the overall feeling of the hue that I'm seeing, right? What are basic qualities, really just trying to narrow it down. What strikes me, right? When they say off the top of your head, first impressions, that kind of thing. I'll also spend a little bit of time, doing a quick little thumbnail drawing. Not so much lately, but there definitely was a point where I was doing that quite a bit, just to get an overall sense of how I might convey the values. From that point, it's creating a very basic line drawing. I don't draw a lot of detail on there, again, for reasons that I sort of alluded to earlier. The more detail I draw, the more things I feel like I need to fill in. And by keeping it loose with the line drawing and very simple, I'm forced to do a lot of those decisions with the brush as I go. Sometimes we have this notion that we need to see significant increase in capability and output, or it's not worthwhile. But I would rather, even 1/5 of a percent or 1/2 of a percent, really doesn't matter, on a daily basis, as opposed to doing nothing for a couple of months and then hoping for, a 5% or a 10% increase. I'm going to get a lot more out of the daily incremental pieces. So in thinking that way, it became a lot easier for me just to say, okay, well, I'm really busy in teaching. There's something to be learned in that process as well. But if I can just find, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, even if it's just, a gesture drawing or a continuous line drawing, really anything, it's going to be something incrementally. And that made it a lot easier for me to do something daily.
I'd like to thank Cori, Nico, and Ian for taking time out of their busy schedules to talk with me. Don't forget, we've got our annual Opus Daily Practice Challenge happening throughout the month of February. I hope this episode has provided you with some inspiration and motivation to take part, hone some techniques, and expand and execute your vision further. Tune in next month for our final episode on the power of art. We'll be hearing from another selection of established voices whilst discussing creating a path towards change. Till then, thanks for listening.